Hello and welcome to our webinar, the Publishing Services RFP Process, Key Considerations for Societies. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today, Eileen Kiley from the Materials Research Society, Angela Gibson from the Modern Language Association, and Michael Pearson from the Mathematical Association of America. Next. So I'm Pam Harley, partner at ClarkEsposito. I'll be doing an introduction and moderating today. ClarkEsposito is a consulting firm with a practice focus in business strategy related to professional and scholarly information. We work with professional societies, libraries and library consortia, funders, and technology providers involved in creating, curating, and disseminating professional information, such as journals, books, databases, and software. Next. I'm going to start with the strategic concerns related to publishing services RFPs. Next. In our consulting work, we've handled many publishing services RFPs, and we generally have at least a couple going at any one time. We view the publishing services RFP as guiding one of the most important decisions a society will make. The value of the deal to the society often represents one of its largest revenue lines. And here are just a few of the important decisions a society makes as part of this RFP. Which publisher is the best strategic fit for your society and its publications? Have you maximized your potential financial return? Have you negotiated the highest level of services for your publications? What's the ideal contract length given the current environment and your specific circumstances? Would a shorter or maybe a longer term contract benefit you? Which publisher's proposal creates the most long-term value for your publications? So at the end of the contract term, will you be well positioned for a renewal conversation or another RFP if circumstances warrant it? And next. So why do some societies partner with larger publishers? Usually the reason to seek a partnership with a publisher arises from access to the institutional market and library budgets, and in a growing number of regions in the world. Library budgets are largely taken up by publishers' large aggregations of journals, aka big deals, and those budgets have been flat or declining for a while. This forces libraries to be on the hunt for where cuts can be made, and oftentimes independent society journals are an easy target simply because they can be canceled without requiring the effort of renegotiating a big deal. Also, transformative agreements are starting to look a lot like open access big deals. Large scale seems to be a factor in their success, and they are primarily being struck with the large publishers. Even in these new types of deals, a relationship with a large publisher can be the best way to access library budgets. And of course, in the current pandemic impacted environment with budgets experiencing significant cuts, some societies are looking for the revenue risk management that a big publisher can bring. Next. So let's talk about timeline. Next. The primary point I want to make about timeline is to plan ahead, at least 2 years. Next slide. So what I'm showing here is an overview of the stages of the RFP process. We don't really have time today to walk through these details. I really just want to make the point that a publishing services RFP is an involved process with many phases and many important tasks. It's much easier to make good decisions and negotiate good agreements when you have enough time. Be sure to allow enough time for your part of the process as well as the publishers. Rushing any phase can put the outcome at risk. It's also worth saying that this represents an ideal schedule. Any phase that involves a lot of interchange between society and publisher can take longer. Contract negotiations in particular can easily take twice as long if there's a lot of back and forth in the negotiations. Next. So how can you set yourself up for success in the RFP? I'm going to offer a few tips. Next. This is not a procurement process for software assistants. Don't treat it like one. A procurement style RFP focused on a requirements comparison matrix, it focuses your attention on the wrong things and risks missing the opportunity to find the best strategic partner for your organization. Pay attention to publishing strategy. What are the priorities for your society and how does your publishing strategy support them? For example, if it's a priority for your society to move to open access, you'll want to be very aware of this in your RFP approach. Or if your society has plans to grow your publishing portfolio, portfolio, you'll want to have this in mind as you evaluate potential partners. If you can't articulate your publishing strategy, pause until you figured it out. Eileen Kiley will talk about how upfront strategic planning played a role in MRS's RFP. Industry expertise matters. Societies are experts in the content they publish, but do you have someone on staff who's expert in market conditions, especially in the institutional market? What about consortia? What about open access agreements and how they'll impact your journal and your revenue? Publishers live and breathe institutional licensing. You'll want to be able to understand how your publications fit into this environment and how to mitigate risks in the deal you strike with the publisher. Also, remember that publishers are highly experienced when it comes to responding to RFPs. They have far more information at their fingertips about journal valuation, market conditions, typical financial offers, and contract terms than most societies do. This creates an information asymmetry that you'll want to defend against. Try to counterbalance this with knowledge and expertise on your side of the table. Next. Prioritize the process. It's very challenging to fit this in among someone's full-time job. The RFP process will always get pushed aside for some other priority, like getting the issue to the printer or the annual meeting. If you decide to use an in-house resource to manage the RFP, be prepared to give that person space to prioritize the RFP process over other duties. Also plan that you'll lose a significant portion of that person's time while the process unfolds. Be generous with deadlines. Don't set unreasonable deadlines. Don't expect the publisher to make up for your own delays. Rushing risks not leaving enough time for the publisher to fully prepare. You want publishers to make their best possible offer. This requires careful analysis and thoughtful response. Think strategically about what information about your business to share as part of the RFP process. Publishers will require a lot of detailed, confidential information about your publishing program to inform their offers, but consider whether there's information that you should hold back. And make sure what you share is accurate. The offers you get will be contingent on the accuracy of that information. Clarity and accuracy can be more challenging than you think, as you may be required to pull together and even merge information from different parts of your organization. Angela Gibson will talk about the importance of managing information in MLA's RFP. Next. Keep in mind that this is a negotiation. It goes back and forth and back and forth. Don't try to conclude negotiations too early. We found that iterative, competitive bidding can often lead to significant improvements in offers. And you're not done until you have a signed contract. Come to agreement on business terms like financial offer, level of services provided, roles and responsibilities before awarding contract while you still have maximum negotiating power. Get good legal input from a lawyer who is knowledgeable about intellectual property and publishing. Watch out for MAC, aka Material Adverse Change clauses. These clauses have teeth these days given the number of adverse conditions we're currently living under, and they can open the door for a contract renegotiation with potential reduced payout even after the contract is signed. And finally, the time to negotiate a graceful exit is when you're signing the contract, not when you're terminating. Take a moment to celebrate getting to a signed contract, but don't get complacent. This is the time to put your new relationship to the test. Michael Pearson will talk about a project MAA conducted to help it get the most out of its relationship with a new publisher right out of the gate. Next. So I'm going to leave you with this. The Publishing Services RFP does not begin with release of the RFP, nor does it end with the signing of an agreement. It requires upfront planning, careful attention to execution during the process, and laying the groundwork for successful partnership between society and publisher. And that's how we structured this webinar, as before, during, and after. Before is brought to us by Eileen Kiley, Director of Communications at the Materials Research Society. Eileen's going to tell us how about MRS's advanced planning for an RFP and how that planning guided the RFP process and the eventual selection of a new publisher. During is covered by Angela Gibson, Director of Scholarly Communication at the Modern Language Association. Angela will present how a carefully managed RFP process leads to the best outcome. And after, Michael Pearson, Executive Director of the Mathematical Association of America, will tell us about how MAA set a course for its new relationship with the publisher by creating a shared set of goals and KPIs to guide the partnership. And next. So I'm going to turn things over to Eileen now.
Okay, thanks, Pam. I'm going to talk about, again, preparing for the RFP process. And I'll start with a brief background on the Materials Research Society. MRS is an interdisciplinary society of about 15,000 members hailing from academia, industry, and government. Our publishing portfolio includes a books program, as well as 5 journals and a large proceedings archive. And that is the portfolio that made up the RFP that I'll be discussing today. Next slide. So again, I'll be discussing the strategical and tactical activities that took place before MRS's RFP process began and how those activities have formed our approach to the RFP process. Our current partnership agreement ends on December 31st of this year. So we actually began planning in 2017 so that we can make a 2019 decision. Next slide, please. This shows the timeline that we put together back in 2017 in order to get us to the point where we are today and where we will be at the beginning of 2021. So we started in 2017 with an overall assessment and operating review of our portfolio, as well as a market scan and competitive analysis. We did that. We engaged consultants, ClarkEsposito, to work with us on that. In 2018, we began developing our strategic intent for the portfolio, which I'll discuss in more detail, and securing the consultants that we were planning to work with for the RFP process. By that point, we were ready to start the RFP process in 2019, and we did complete the process by our target at the end of the year and signed a contract at the end of last year. And 2020 our goal was to execute the transition if we were switching, and we are switching publishers, so we are right in the throes of that transition right now. And with the target of a new contract start date on January 1st of next year. Next slide, please. So starting in 2017, MRS worked with consultants. We wanted to conduct the operating review and assessment, as well as a competitive analysis and a market scan, asking some key questions. First, and most importantly, is should we issue an RFP? Second, how should we position ourselves now for the best future contract? We didn't have a lot of time, but we certainly had the time to demonstrate that we had an action plan, demonstrate that the society was invested in making improvements to the portfolio for the long term and with a potential new partner. And importantly, what can we do to position ourselves for future revenue growth? That was important as part of the RFP process and, of course, overall for the society and for the portfolio. We identified and implemented actionable recommendations. Those included first, issue an RFP, focusing on impact factor. It was recommended that we conduct a bibliometric analysis on our titles, which we did. Focusing our marketing on 3 KPIs and carefully tracking the results of those. And those KPIs were submissions, usage, and subscriptions. And then exploring adding original research to one of our journals, which we also did, and we actually just began publishing that content this month. So we then presented the findings of this review and assessment to the board of directors at the 2017 MRS fall meeting with ClarkEsposito there. This provided valuable information to our board of directors about the portfolio as a whole and prepared them for the upcoming RFP process for which they would be involved in the decision making. It also served to introduce our consultants to the board of directors and establish their expertise, which we felt was very important in the event that we would plan to use them as part of the RFP process. Next slide. So as we moved into 2018, we began developing our strategic alliance intent. This included multi-stakeholders, including MRS headquarters, our board of directors planning committee, and the MRS publications committee. The strategic alliance intent is not a list of what we wanted the publisher to do for us, but instead a list of expectations of what we hope to achieve together with our publisher. And it really served as a foundational document for creating the RFP, and it helped to guide our decision making throughout the process. Next. So as part of this process, we started with reviewing our background materials, including the strategic intent that we developed in 2009 for our current partnership. We also pulled together the vision that our publications committee had created, as well as a SWOT analysis that they put together in 2017. And we used the 2017 consultant report, which was very valuable for the process. We discussed foundational considerations, including how an alliance should further MRS's strategic plan, the society as a whole, how the portfolio would work together with the society's strategic plan, the type of portfolio that MRS wants. Do we want journals, books, other products? How big should the portfolio be? And what should our audience be? We currently focus on the broad materials community, but was that something that we wanted to change? Financial expectations of the alliance, as well as the type of alliance that we wanted. For example, working with commercial publishers. Do we want to focus on nonprofit publishers only? Do we want one publisher to handle everything, or do we want to break up pieces of the portfolio and work with multiple partners? So we spent the better portion of the year working on developing that intent, and it was approved at the end of the year in November of 2018. Next slide. So also at the same time as we were developing that intent, we began preliminary preparations for an RFP process. First, we contracted with the RFP consultant, and that was ClarkEsposito. And I would highly recommend that anyone who's considering this process work with a consultant. This is something that we do every 10 years, but they do it on a day-to-day basis. So there were just a lot of things that we didn't know, and that they have the experience to help guide us through that process. So we found that to be incredibly valuable. In July of 2018, this was about a year and a half before we wanted to make a decision, we began putting together a timeline, task force roles and responsibilities, and looking at levels of board approval that were required. Now, we did this a year and a half before we wanted a decision, because we had already, by working on that 2017 analysis, we had already been through a lot of the discovery that would have been required in a normal situation. So in November 2018, we finalized the RFP selection task force, and we had 8 members on our task force. 3 from our board of directors, including our president, our vice president, he's our president this year, who was the chair of the task force, 2 members of our publications committee, and 3 representatives from MRS headquarters, me, the director of communications, as well as the director of finance and our executive director. So the task force had a number of responsibilities, and some people were involved more on a day-to-day basis, like me and the chair, and some were more involved on things like attending our regular calls, reviewing the RFP, reviewing the proposals from their perspectives, their various areas of expertise, very importantly, interviewing the finalists at MRS headquarters and making the final recommendation to our board of directors. Next. So by 2019, we were ready to develop and issue our RFP, and I know Angela is going to cover that part of the process in more detail, but I'll just say that with the preparations we had done the previous 2 years, we were ready, and it was very important that we had that strategic alliance intent. It was valuable at every decision point, in every board discussion, and as a foundational piece of the actual RFP document. And we did ultimately decide that we would change publishers. So in 2020, we are working on the transition now, and in January 2021, we will be ready to launch. Next slide. So just a few concluding comments to summarize. The multiple years of very detailed planning gave us a lot of time to, first of all, identify the best consultants to help us achieve our specific goals, to engage key stakeholders throughout the society in the process. Their inputs were incredibly valuable to all the decisions and planning throughout, to position the portfolio for success. Before we issued the RFP, it really demonstrated that, again, that we had an action plan. It demonstrated our value as a potential partner and the society's commitment to the portfolio, and also helped to document our plans for future improvement of the portfolio. And then finally, developing that carefully crafted strategic intent really helped our potential partners to understand what MRS's goals were, and it helped us to guide our decision-making process every step of the way.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Angela is up next.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to talk about the RFP process during the process in the thick of things. Next. A little bit about the Modern Language Association. We're a membership organization with over 20,000 members. We support teaching, scholarship, and professional development, serving educators and students of language, literature, and related disciplines. We're the largest humanities scholarly society. We also run a multi-channel publishing program, scholarly communication platforms, books. We have one main subscription journal, and we also publish a style manual for writers, the PMLA handbook. Next. So the RFP that we conducted with the help of consultant ClarkEsposito was for a flagship journal, PMLA. It's the largest, one of the most prominent journals in the humanities. And we've been self-publishing that journal since 1884. So we had a lot of concerns about making this big change, and some reputational considerations as well going into it, and felt strongly we needed to be guided by experienced hands. Next. So the timeline of the RFP process, which Pam noted, is about a year, roughly. The contours of that process are developing the RFP, so doing your research, creating a narrative to send out to the world, issuing it, answering any questions that come in, reviewing the proposals that come in and doing financial analysis, selecting a pool of candidates who are going to be the finalists, and doing in-person presentations. And then, of course, hopefully you will select one to enter into negotiations with. But the one thing that was perhaps surprising to me is there's a lot of iteration within the rough contours of that year. A year seems like a long time, but a lot is packed into that year. There are iterative negotiations, a lot of back and forth with information gathering, a lot of heavy duty analysis. So it's a year that, as Pam noted, you're going to want to clear your plate for. Next. One of the main kind of guidelines I think I would impart is that you want to manage information assiduously. It sounds obvious, but it's easy for even the most organized person to get turned around by the sheer volume of information incoming and outgoing. It's also easy for information to get siloed with you or one of your team members. Email's not, as we know, an effective storage device or task management system, but the bottom line is that a lot of these communications are going to come in through email. So it's worth thinking in advance how you want to store and share information. We did a pretty good job being sort of, or the team was very organized, but if I were to do it again, I might actually set up some sort of project management software, because a lot of the information that you put together to issue the RFP and analyze it comes into place with negotiations and then with actually the transfer of the property. So think about that carefully. Next. The other key thing to keep in mind is that, of course, you want to identify the core team. Everyone's going to want to be in the room, but your core needs are going to be financial and legal analysis, the key person who's accountable to your board of decision makers, and the key person whose knowledge area this covers. In our case, the core team was our executive director, our CFO, and me. I oversee the publishing program. But I would add, don't forget to look beyond the senior staff. This can be a learning experience and an opportunity for staff members to grow outside of their day-to-day roles. In our case, the journal's managing editor has an MBA, and so she's an ACE at financial analysis. So she was very helpful to the core team in thinking through every possibility. And I would also say, if you're leading the project, try to identify a reliable deputy. You're going to need a sounding board, and you also kind of want coverage. You don't want to be the only person able to kind of manage information or kind of think through things. Now, I would add that although I was not the ultimate decision maker, nor do I report to our board, our executive director does, and she was the one that signed the contract, I was able to save her from everything but sort of top level sign-offs by acting as a key point person, analyst, project manager, and negotiator. So if you are in a position as an executive director, CEO, and you can deputize some work to an area expert, I would consider it, because it's a lot of work. But if you're a smaller society and don't have the benefit of the kind of personnel that the PMLA does, this is likely to consume a lot of your year. So try to offload some other projects if you can, so you can focus on it, because you will want to focus attentively. Next. So prepare for the change. Since we were going from being self-published since 1884 to potentially having a publishing partner, we thought this change was going to feel dramatic, like we were facing some existential crisis. But that wasn't the case at all. And I think part of it might be because we were as transparent as we could be with staff members and with our board about the fact that we were considering this possibility. So to the extent possible, we talked about some of the operational changes that could occur and how staff roles might or might not shift. And, you know, this has just generated positive feelings about the transition. Part of that, of course, is I think we selected a partner that's just a really good fit. So that's a large part of it, but be as open as you can to prepare everyone, every stakeholder for the change. Next. Develop alternative plans. So since we were self-published, we looked at all the ways we might do things differently to see cost savings, increased revenue, and increased staff capacity to take on new projects. Had we remained self-published, we costed this out, we met with vendors, and we ran through every possible financial scenario we could think of. You know, we asked how could we improve things to be competitive ourselves. The RFP is a lot of work and it's costly, so of course the ideal is to come out of this with a winning partner, but it really helped us feel confident in the decision we ultimately made to imagine staying self-published and feeling confident we could do that if we had to. Next. As Eileen noted in her presentation, you'll ideally have goals for the program, not a list of service requirements for your partner. But I would say that you're going to want to constantly refer back to that initial research. You don't just collect it and finish it. It comes into play in all sorts of ways. It helps inform your decision making. It helps inform your contract negotiations in very substantial ways. And it actually helps inform and builds the blocks or the building blocks for your transfer of the property. So I would keep this foundational research at the forefront. And going back to my earlier point, you want a way to have that information at your fingertips because you're going to be using it all the time throughout the year. Next. Focus the decision making. Another key aspect to help inform the decision making is to be clear about how that decision will get made. In our case, we got approval from the board to go with a publishing partner, should the bids be favorable and a good fit be found. It was left to staff to analyze the bids and to select the partner. And again, that's a contract that our executive director signs. So once the concept was greenlighted, in other words, it helped us move forward nimbly and with a kind of full and capacious understanding of each and every detail coming in, so we could put all that to bear on the decision and kind of move things forward quickly. Next. Carefully plan for the presentations. So you know your criteria for making decisions, and you've collected the data that informs it, and you know how you're going to make that decision. But aside from all that is the question of the relationship, how the people will work together, and what the possibilities are. I would use the agenda to not only press on open questions and ask for clarification, elaboration, engage intent, but make sure that a welcome environment is created during that conversation so that it is a conversation and not an interview. For us, the meeting really opened up the possibilities for the partnership that we ultimately ended up entering in ways that were so unexpected that it was almost, I would describe as a game changer. So staging the conversation is very important and essential. So carefully think through what you want out of that meeting so you can get the most out of it. And then my next and final slide. Treat the negotiations like a roadmap. So this was the most involved contract I'd worked on drafting and negotiating. You know, the lawyers deal with the template, come at the end and do all the legal stuff. But this is your first chance to work with a new partner, of course. And it's your chance to identify and pin down the core business needs. You're going to need to go through the workflow, anticipate every single thing that could come up so you have a solution in place already. This may involve your gaining an understanding of other business units in your society, so you understand how it's going to affect them and bringing them into that part of the process so they know. It's also going to involve that you already know how it's going to affect any other contract you have, so that you can factor that into your contract with a new partner. And then, of course, once the negotiations are done, you're going to celebrate, as Pam said, because you'll be happy. It's all over and going to its next phase. Yeah. Okay.
And of course, it's not nearly done at that point, but it is worth celebrating.
And it's a glorious moment.
That's right, it is. Thank you so much, Angela. And now Michael is up.
All right. Thank you very much, Pam. I am happy to be here today. The Mathematical Association of America is over a century old, and we're a small organization. We have a portfolio of 3 journals, a magazine, and a news magazine. The 3 journals and the magazine were part of this package that we dealt with, and Eileen and Angela have given a great overview of some of the earlier stages, but I do want to reiterate a couple of things that have been said. Our oldest journal, and until I heard Angela say that PMLA started in 1884, I was sure I would have the oldest journal. Our flagship journal started in 1894, so it's been around for quite some time, and it goes without saying that the publishing industry has changed quite dramatically over that 125 or so years, and even, of course, over the last 20 years. And as Pam said, why would you ever start this process? Well, there are a lot of challenging environmental issues. For us, we did not do everything in-house. We're very focused on the editorial part. Our content we focus on with laser-like focus, and it's great. Our editorial content is I'm very proud of that. But we had cobbled together a network of small vendors for printing, composition, marketing, all those sorts of things. And it became clear a decade ago that the changes, if we wanted to continue to be successful, especially in the library market, as Pam mentioned, access to library budgets is more and more difficult for small independent publishers. So we really recognized quite some time ago that we needed to begin this process. We did start our contract with Taylor & Francis actually started in 2018 was the first year it was actually in force. We began the process back in 2015, of going to the board, getting the buy-in, selling the overall goals of the process, and moved from there. And we really were looking for a strategic partner. And I think another thing that Pam mentioned, the knowledge asymmetry is a very important consideration. And not just, I would say it's more than asymmetry, but having a partner who can view your portfolio from a more disinterested position. When you're inside the process, you sort of have your own ideas about what your portfolio looks like, but it's not always the same way that an external partner might look at it. So that sort of level of insight is very useful in this process. Going back to the strategic partner, next slide, please. So this is, as I said, here's the names of our 3 peer-reviewed journals. And again, we also have a magazine called Math Horizons. And we did in 2017 signed the contract with Taylor & Francis. And as I mentioned, the first issues were in January of 2018. Next slide, please. So as Pam mentioned, we really are looking for a strategic partner. In fact, everybody has mentioned that fact. This is not just about finding somebody who's going to be a turnkey solution for certain parts of your logistics. This is really, you want this partnership to bring additional credibility to your portfolio, additional visibility to your portfolio, and you want to look for ways that you can leverage the strengths of your partner and that they are aware of your strengths so that you can combine your efforts hopefully the sum of those efforts will be greater than the parts independently, as you like to think. So once we had launched the journals with Taylor and Francis, it took probably a year to get the wrinkles out of every single process. You know, this is about relationships in large part. And I think the fact that my publishing team staff had been involved, all of them had been involved from day one of the discussions. That really helped because everybody was going into this with a positive attitude, but still there are different work habits and new schedules to put in place. And so it took probably a year for us to feel complete from the time we signed the contract, which was maybe 6 months before the contract started, and then another 6 months into the contract, we felt like the transition was beginning to smooth out. And at that point, even though we have a fairly long time left on this contract, we signed a 7-year contract, we began to recognize that we had learned a lot about our own program through the process. We gathered data and put it together in ways that we hadn't thought to do before. And we realized that we didn't want to get to some point in the future and have to reconstruct our knowledge of our program again. So we wanted to begin to work with Taylor and Francis to come to a shared understanding of what data we would routinely share with each other and how we would use that data in decision making about new marketing efforts, new communications efforts, potentially launching new products, so that we could emphasize to Taylor and Francis the fact that yes, we've got great editorial teams and it's great working with you to get that editorial content out there, but we want to be more activist partners in this. So we, again, to help, we hired ClarkEsposito to work with us on a set of negotiations with Taylor and Francis to figure out what are our key objectives, set key objectives, decide what the metrics are, understand what the reports are that we can have ready access to and how we can use those reports to and that data to make decisions and improve the performance of the portfolio. Next slide, please. So again, we began this discussion in the middle of 2018, again, right halfway through the first year when the contract was actually in force, with a goal, and we met with Taylor and Francis. We began with ClarkEsposito to get some ideas, our own ideas in order as to how we might approach this partnership. And then we met with, everybody sat down for a big meeting in January of 2019 to go back and forth, share ideas about this, and to negotiate the key performance indicators that would guide our work. And I'm not going to go through all those details, but I would say that I was pleased that Taylor and Francis was very receptive to this process. We got no pushback from the general idea. Now, of course, we had to be willing to, understand the kinds of reports that they work with internally. We didn't want to sort of come in and say, we need you to retool all your reports to suit our needs. We wanted to come to some mutual understanding so that we weren't putting big new requirements on either Taylor and Francis or us, but just to take advantage of data streams and performance indicators that already existed, and to understand what Taylor and Francis would value in terms of our participation in marketing and so forth. Next slide, please. So, of course, here, you know, it's not surprising, some of our objectives. We want to increase readership. I mean, that's huge, right? The value of the portfolio is going to depend on usage. And we also wanted to grow our international audience. We have probably about 10% of our core members are international. They come from all over the world. But we believe that there's an opportunity for us to grow that audience, and so that was a big piece of it. We didn't have that international presence in terms of marketing. Taylor and Francis does, so we wanted to talk about that. Obviously, you'll have access to this information later, but number 5, growing the revenue. We also want to keep that in mind, even though these days, with the massive changes in publications and shifts towards open source, some days I think sustaining revenue on the journal program is a good objective. But certainly we want to do our best to maximize the value of the portfolio to both Taylor and Francis and us. Next slide, please. So we're going to focus just a little bit on increasing the usage. As I said, that's one of the big things we wanted to do. So we were looking with at Taylor and Francis at what are the most accessed parts of our current portfolio, and then how to use that to sculpt our marketing efforts. You know, if we know that particular features or particular themes within our portfolio have been attractive, then we can feature those in various member emails or emails to our larger potential market, so that we could, you know, draw attention in ways that we thought would catch the eye of the audience, of the potential audiences. So we've been using that usage data to help shape our marketing efforts. Next slide, please. And here is this slide and the next one have a fair amount of detail about some of the outcomes that we set with Taylor and Francis. So I'm not going to go over this in detail either, but I think it's useful to see again that that going through that process of really sitting down and thinking carefully about what are the very specific and detailed ways in which you're going to partner, how that's going to play out, what are the expectations on each side. So that's been really useful, and I think that attention to detail went over really well with Taylor and Francis, you know, because they like to have things also fairly rigorously defined, because it's a big operation. They can't just do things in an ad hoc way. Next slide, please. So again, more of the details here, and you'll see that getting that information about readership across various regions in the world has been an important part of it, and also the topics. Next slide, please. More, and of course, marketing campaign, looking at open rates on emails, all those sorts of things. And then, of course, these days, social media is also plays a role in promoting our products. Next slide, please. One of the interesting things we've done, as I mentioned, our flagship journal goes back 125 years. Our other journals are over 50 years old, and the magazine about 30 years old now. And we have a tremendous archive of materials to draw from. And perhaps in some sense, MAA is more like MLA in the ways in which that older information in mathematics remains of interest to the community, less so than research in some areas like biology, where the research is gets stale pretty soon for the most part. But we realized that we had a huge amount of great material to draw on. So we have begun a process of producing virtual special editions that draw articles around a particular theme. And our target right now is to do 2 of these a year, although this year we're doing 3. The first issue in March of 2019 was for Pi Day, which is March 14th. And so we had a special issue that featured articles from the last 100 years or so on the number pi. And that was a big hit. You can see the topics of a couple of others. Next slide, please. Again, I should say we make these issues open access. These virtual special issues are open access for a limited time, so that we do get a chance to expose new audiences to our content through email list promotion and other kinds of advertising campaigns. Mostly digital advertising campaigns, although we mention them in our newsletter and so forth. And they've gone over really well, big hits. And you'll see the math and the arts was the most successful of the 3 that we had data on so far. We just recently had a 4th, and we're actually going to launch a virtual special issue on elections and gerrymandering about 6 weeks to 2 months before the November election, which we think that might be rather timely, and there's some. So it'll be interesting to see how this one does as well. But we're trying to key these issues on certain externally visible events or things that potentially would attract people who, if they maybe just saw mathematics, might not be as interested. But seeing things like elections or seeing math and the arts, we're hoping, well, so far the data is really good. So we're pleased with this as part of our promotional strategy. Next slide, please. So this has been a great process for us. We're still tweaking, we're still adjusting, we're still talking to Taylor and Francis about ways to grow this even more. We've even begun discussions about a potential new journal with them that they're excited about, and I think they're partly excited because they know they have seen that if they launch a new journal with us, we'll do our part to promote and make that journal successful. So we're feeling pretty good about the status of that discussion. And again, we have made progress already. We increased our subscriptions. We grew our revenue by 13% last year, which was really a pleasant outcome of this work. The usage grew, as I mentioned, in part because of the virtual special issues, but also I will say that a lot of that growth in viewership and readership was international, which was part of our goal. So that we were really pleased that we were able to begin to tap into that international audience. So I was really pleased with that. Okay, and I think that's the last slide, but let's see if there's one more. The takeaways, absolutely. So just, yeah, to reiterate some of this, it's been a great process. again, just as with the original RFP process, having having the help of an external partner to assess what other publishers are doing with their partners, to assess other strategies that have worked in other environments, to understand that landscape and help us prioritize our own work. I think that was really important. I think the value of this, of course, as I mentioned, we've made progress on some of the key objectives, which is great. But I think also just the signaling it does, the strengthening of the relationship with the partner, and that goes back to the earlier discussion that you really are looking for a strategic partner, not just somebody to provide concierge service for, you know, marketing, printing, distribution kinds of things. So, and of course, my goal is that when we do get to the renegotiation of the contract, we're going to be in as strong as possible a position to renew that contract with everybody feeling good, and of course, hopefully getting a good terms for a new contract. So, thank you very much, and Pam, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those presentations. They were terrific, full of good advice and insights. Because the session is pre-recorded, we don't have the benefit of live Q&A today, though I think that SSP is going to facilitate a future live Q&A session. But because we can't do it today, we thought up some questions ourselves. We know that Q&A is always the best part of a webinar like this. So let's move on to those now. So a question I have for everybody who wants to answer: what did you learn through the RFP process that you wish you known when you started? And were there any big surprises? And Eileen, since we haven't heard from you in a few minutes, we'll start with you.
Okay. You know, actually, thinking about this, I would say there were not a lot of big surprises. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we worked with experienced consultants. Going back to the timeline that Pam showed in her presentation, that was very detailed, what to expect month by month by month. You know, I think if there were any major curveballs that were thrown in, they may have been shielded from us. But we really, I can say, you know, there were a couple of things that maybe presented challenges, but I would not say that there were any big surprises because we planned it out so well.
What about you, Angela?
Yeah, I was going to say the biggest surprise is that it wasn't as onerous as I thought it was going to be. Yes, it was a lot of work, but we had lots of help. I would agree that having ClarkEsposito work with us was central to that. We also have a great staff, and we have some staffing support and had a lot of talent there, so that was crucial. I guess the one thing I realized while doing it is that if we hadn't done a full financial analysis of our entire publishing program going into it, we would not have been in a strong position to make decisions and kind of think strategically about what our goals were for the particular asset that we were doing the RFP for, in this case, the journal. So we kind of had larger ideas in mind already going into it, and that was important too, doing that kind of prep work. Yeah.
What about you, Michael?
I think so I'm in a slightly different position. I'm not directly involved in day-to-day publications operations, and we began this process when a senior position in publications had actually been vacated, and we were so I think the surprise to me was how much information we had failed to properly collate over the years, and the ways in which we came to appreciate the need to track that information on a more routine basis, which again led to our decision to not stop once the partnership was settled, but to make sure that we keep everything organized through the partnership and beyond.
Yeah, information management, collection and management is such a huge part of these processes, and really, it really is important. Publishers need this, and they need it to be accurate so that they can form their own, their offers for you. So I heard each of you talk about the decision-making process and who you involved in that, and I want to know a little bit more about how you decided what kind of RFP, like task force, working group, core team, whatever you called it, you needed for the process, how you decided how you would involve them. So Angela, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Yeah, part of it in our case was obvious and probably tracks what other people did. The roles involved, we needed our executive director, we needed the person who oversees our finance department, and we needed the person who oversees our publications department. So, okay, that's obvious. I think the other part that came into play for us was that we had staff members who had other skills and talents. I mentioned the person who managed the journal also having an MBA. So that was an obvious person to include. And then we also have someone who maybe wasn't involved in as heavily in the decision-making team, but was involved in some of the data gathering, who works in our information systems department, doing project management, who worked on the publisher side for a commercial publisher, bringing journals in. And so he was really key to helping us understand some of the things we were being asked and what was going to happen down the line, and is now project managing the transfer. So involving him early too, as a stakeholder in some way, was important. So I guess it was a combination of the roles we had on staff and the kind of other talents we had and assembling those. And then we just try to keep it transparent and consultative, but lean in terms of the decision making, I guess, is the way, that was our way to move forward. That makes sense.
Eileen, I know that you had a pretty formal governance process, and how did you convene that working group and use them? Because you use them very effectively.
Yeah, so we got some general advice from you on how to put together a task force, and then we took that and we thought about how we would make that work for MRS. And there were discussions that were, at the leadership level within the society, making sure that we had the right representation from both staff and volunteers, including the highest levels of leadership within the society. So there were some discussions there that helped us get to what the makeup of the task force should be. And then, we thought about, we were thinking about the individuals who should be involved. We really wanted to get that diversity of expertise. We had members from academia, industry, and government, and at various leadership levels, and each of them was able to bring a unique perspective to the process. And all of them have published extensively. All of them have been involved in the society at leadership levels. So kind of bringing all that together helped us to be very efficient and also to be very focused in our decision making.
Mm-hmm. What about at MAA, Michael?
Well, I am very fortunate. I have a senior director for publications operations, and she led the effort internally with the other publication staff and, of course, finance staff. And so I was very pleased with the way that process unfolded. I think I took a slightly different approach in that I assigned myself the role of keeping governance folks entirely out of the process. I sold that I did work for a year to sell to my board why we were doing it and what our goals were, but I did not feel that the board members had the appropriate expertise to directly involve themselves with the negotiations of the process. And so I was the go-between and sort of shielded my task force from the governance side of things in order to move things along.
Yeah, I can say from experience that what's really important here that is whatever type of decision-making group you convene or that you are required to convene for governance reasons at your society, make sure they're all involved from the start. engage them from the start. The most challenging thing is when you have, say, volunteer leadership who sort of drop into the process at the very end when you're trying to make that final decision, because they just don't have the grounding that you have. You've gone through a really rigorous process, and it can be quite disruptive to have somebody drop in at the last minute and start asking questions that have already been answered. I heard a lot in your presentations about managing change. And each of your RFPs involves significant change. For MAA and MLA, you moved from self-publishing, that's a huge change. And for MRS, you moved from a longtime partner. So how did you go about managing that change? And I wanna get you to talk about this from different perspectives. Obviously, the publishing staff have to deal with this change. But what about the journal editors? What about volunteer leadership? Did any of you involve your larger membership in this change management process? And Michael, I'm going to ask you to address this one first.
Yes. So, of course, there's different kinds of involvement, and we felt that, and I still feel that in our association, which is very much prides ourselves on our sense of community and our sense of member engagement and involvement, I knew that socializing this prospective change and the process was going to be extremely important. And we went early and often to our editors, to our editorial boards, to our council on publications, to the full board, to keep them posted on the progress of the process, but also to assure them that we were not giving away the editorial control that they were accustomed to. That what we were trying to do was to consolidate many of the kinds of required support services and logistics, and that we were contracting out on a piecemeal basis before, as well as expand our capacity in marketing and expand our international presence. So we really were very intentional, and this was a year-long process of not only meeting with the individual boards at our annual meetings, for example, but even putting articles in our news magazine that described to the broader membership what we were trying to do. So even though we did not involve members directly in the negotiations process or in those stages, we talked early and often about this process, because I think our community doesn't like surprises. So
Right.
I think that was an absolutely critical part of the process.
Right. How about at MLA, Angela?
I think very similar. We, in addition to the kind of trying to acculturate the staff to the idea that a change was coming and be as transparent as possible there, we spoke with our board and our governing board about the fact that, you know, editorial decision making was being retained, and we were doing this in part to further the reach of the journal and talked about the process that we were undergoing, so that they knew it was afoot. And we've been surprised by the level of enthusiasm, by the idea of the partnership coming from all corners. I think also, like I said, I think we just got a partner that's a really good fit and everybody's comfortable with, so that helps too. I think that's a large part of it. But.
Yeah. And what about at MRS, Eileen?
So, well, we're actually right in the middle of managing this change right now, and it's a little bit different for us because we've done this once before 10 years ago, and we work very well with our current partner. So what for us, the key was, you know, as Michael said, socializing the change, making sure that staff and editors are up to speed on the fact that things are going to be different, that the way we work with our current partner may not be the way that we work with our new one. And also, you know, the personal relationships I have found are just so important in making all of this work. And what's really been good for us is that the current and the future partner and MRS have been meeting together to make sure everything's going to work so it's as smooth as possible. And my focus with the editors and with our staff is, as soon as we possibly could, we tried to introduce everyone in person so that there was that face time. And our current partner has a seat at the table with us. That's something we found to be very important, and we wanted to get that going right away. Now, of course, all of our plans to meet in person multiple times throughout 2020 have been thrown out the window, but we're meeting via Zoom and trying to proceed with that to the extent possible.
Right. So I have one final question for all of you. What's the top piece of advice you'd offer for any society embarking on a publishing services RFP? And I'm going to go to you first, Michael.
I think having expertise at the table that understands the broader landscape, not just in your discipline, but beyond, and that can look at your portfolio from a perspective that's not just internal. That was absolutely critical.
Angela?
Yeah, I would say know why you're doing it. Don't go it alone, similar to what Michael said. And be sure you can devote the necessary resources, including time, to make contingencies for other work. Do it right if you're going to do it.
Yeah. Eileen?
And I agree with both of those. And I would say understand your own goals and priorities for the relationship at the outset and revisit them often throughout the process and even after you've signed that contract.
Yeah, that is terrific advice. I want to thank you all again. This has been a terrific session. I know I've enjoyed it. I hope the speakers have enjoyed it and the people watching it have enjoyed it too. I want to say a huge thanks to our speakers, Eileen, Angela, and Michael, for all the work that they did to prepare for and deliver this session. We all want to thank SSP and especially Mary Beth Barilla for her help getting us ready for this and giving us the opportunity to speak to you all. And thank you too to the community watching. I hope you find this session helpful. So bye for now.
Thank you.